Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Joe O'Connell, Director of VOA's Public Affairs Office, and I want to welcome you all today to today's press conference, which is another in a continuing series of VOA's Newsmaker events. Today we are very happy to have Benazir Bhutto, the former Prime Minister of Pakistan, and who is also here with her husband. Welcome to you, sir, as well. Ms. Bhutto will discuss the future of democracy in Pakistan, give a couple of opening brief remarks, and then take questions and answers for the duration of the time. Today's on-the-record press conference will be used in broadcast to VOA television audiences in Pakistan, Central Asia, as well as around the world. It will also be used for our radio broadcasts and will be made available on our internet website at www.voanews.com. Again, welcome to you all, and I will now turn the program over to my colleague, Dr. Brian Silver, who's chief of VOA's Urdu language service, who will introduce today's speaker and start the press conference. Again, thank you for coming.
Ladies and gentlemen, during the past week, Pakistan has been very much in the news, with the visit of Prime Minister Shaukat Aziz to New York and Washington, and his meetings with a wide range of officials, including President Bush. The Voice of America, and in particular the Urdu broadcasts of Radio Aapki Dunya, and the television program Beyond the Headlines, our 5 days a week program, which airs in prime time and Geo in Pakistan, have given the visit broad coverage. We are very happy to continue the coverage of Pakistan with today's appearance by former Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto. You all know her very well. Suffice it to say that she was the first woman to be elected head of state of a Muslim country. She served twice as Prime Minister from Pakistan, from 88 until 90, and again from 93 until 96. And she continues today as the leader of the Pakistan People's Party, the major secular opposition party in Pakistan. Ms. Bhutto has visited VOA previously for studio interviews, and we welcome her back again today in a Newsmaker appearance. She will make some brief remarks, and then after which we will open the floor for questions. As Joe said, this is basically a press conference to enable her to respond to your questions. The event will last 30 minutes, concluding at 3:20. I would also like to welcome our very numerous distinguished guests, and ask that VOA reporters give our guests a chance to ask the first round of questions. We have microphones in both aisles, and we request those wishing to ask a question to come to the microphones. Please identify yourself and your affiliation, and we would appreciate your keeping your question brief. On occasion, we may have a follow-up question if time permits. And finally, please do turn off your pagers and cell phones. Again, Ms. Bhutto.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank the Voice of America for giving me this opportunity to meet with the media here in Washington, D.C. And we meet today at a difficult time in the world. We meet at a time when America is at war and the threat of terrorism hangs over all of us, irrespective of whether we live in the East or we live in the West. I believe that governing is about making choices. And right now, as I speak to you, I think too of the 100,000 people that we in Pakistan lost during the earthquake in Azad Kashmir and in the northern areas. And I think of the millions who are left to fend for themselves in a bitter and cold winter. It often takes strong action to ward off catastrophe in the future, and certainly strong action is needed to tackle terrorism, for it poses a threat all over the world. The most effective way to undermine terrorism, in the view of the Pakistan People's Party, is to create stable, pluralistic structures through democratic reform. I believe that Pakistan is an example of a nation where the forces of tyranny and terrorism mingle to create an uncertain future. The international community threw its weight behind Pakistan's military dictator following the events of September 11th. It was the right decision to take at the time. But 4 years later, I believe there is serious concern that the inability of the international community to facilitate Pakistan's transition to civilian and democratic rule could undermine our mutual objectives in the long run. Pakistan's military dictatorship has resulted in the domination of the country by the military, and it has led also to the rise of religious parties to power for the first time since the country gained independence in 1947. These religious parties are public supporters of Osama bin Laden and Mullah Omar of Afghanistan, and they have filled the vacuum caused by the military regime's determination to sideline the secular, liberal, and democratic forces of Pakistan. And due to that policy of marginalizing the democratic opposition, extremism has replaced moderation in Pakistan. Worryingly, followers of the Taliban have gained sway in the sensitive border area between Afghanistan and Pakistan, where they have been killing their opponents with impunity, despite the heavy presence of government forces. Unfortunately, the military junta turns a blind eye to their activities. The word of the militants, who call themselves Taliban, has virtually become law in parts of the semi-autonomous North Waziristan tribal area between Afghanistan and Pakistan, while the military itself is once again reluctant to intervene. A prominent Pakistani journalist by the name of Yousafzai has said that the Pakistani army and government have totally abdicated authority in North Waziristan. The Daily Times, a leading newspaper of Pakistan, has declared that elements linked to Al-Qaeda rule the territory. On January 22nd, the New York Times ran a story of how Taliban are moving around the area in pickup trucks. And these terrorists may actually control the territory where bin Laden has sanctuary. So the choice to sustain dictatorship in Pakistan has consequences both in the long term and in the short term that threaten the interests of the West as well as the values of democracy in the East. I would like to quote to you from a well-respected group called the International Crisis Group. The ICG has written that sectarian conflict in Pakistan is the direct consequence of state policies of Islamization and marginalization of secular democratic forces. Co-option and patronage of religious parties by successive military governments have brought Pakistan to a point where religious extremism threatens to erode the foundation of the state and society. And so I believe that a military dictatorship in Pakistan, Washington's key ally, sends the wrong message to more than 1 billion Muslims across the world for the reasons for the war on terror. President Bush called this a war for the values of freedom. Prime Minister Tony Blair said that this was not a war between religions, but a war against oppression and tyranny. So the democratization of Pakistan is important to the war against terror, to the interpretation of Islam as a message of freedom, as well as to the empowerment of the people of Pakistan. The disempowerment of the people of Pakistan has led to the alienation of the people in the 4 federating units of the country. The people feel disempowered, the provinces feel disempowered, and secessionist movements have started in Pakistan's largest province, known as Balochistan. One of the Baloch leaders has already called upon the United Nations to intervene to prevent action against the Balochi people. While Waziristan is being ruled by the Taliban, while the provinces are getting alienated from the center and calling for international intervention, the democratic forces have also lost confidence in the ability of General Musharraf to hold fair elections. And it is but a matter of time before the democratic forces turn to the United Nations and ask them to hold elections in Pakistan, unless the military regime can undertake substantive steps to assure the opposition that the next elections in Pakistan will be fair and free. So, ladies and gentlemen, while I believe the United States and other key influential actors have realized with regard to their own society that terrorism can only be eliminated through pluralistic democratic structures, they should not make Pakistan an exception to that rule. There is much more that I could say, but because we have time constraints, I would prefer to leave some time for you to ask me questions. Thank you very much, Brian. Thank you very much, Voice of America.
Khalid Hassan, Daily Times, Lahore. Mohtarma, General Musharraf told the CNN today in Davos that the government of Pakistan has nothing to do with the issue of the red warrant, and that the Ihtisab Bureau, or the Accountability Bureau, is a fully autonomous organization which acts on its own. Would you like to comment on this?
Yes, this is an example of the ambiguity that General Musharraf maintains, and which is why it is so very difficult for parties like mine to rely on his word. He says one thing and he does another. The National Accountability Bureau is staffed with members handpicked by General Musharraf himself. Whatever they do is on his instructions. But you know, we saw the same thing happen in the tribal areas. On the one hand, there were reports that General Musharraf had collaborated on the airstrikes that took place in the tribal areas where son-in-law of Ayman Zawahiri was apparently killed. And at the same time, the government turned around and told the people of Pakistan that General Musharraf did not collaborate and that Pakistan did not have anything to do with it. So we've seen this duplicity, whether it applies to the international arena or whether it applies to the domestic situation.
Thank you.
Next question.
Foster Klug with the Associated Press. You touched briefly just now on the Interpol notice. Could you comment on what you think it might mean, the timing of it coming as you begin your tour in America, and also generally about the charges against you in Pakistan?
I believe that the Interpol notice has come now because there was a lot of media interest in whether General Musharraf knew about the strikes that took place around January 12th or 13th in the tribal areas. There were a lot of questions being asked. The government said that it was unaware of the strikes, and at the same time, there were reports in the international press that the General Musharraf's regime knew about it and had given permission. So to divert the attention of the domestic press from the issue of whether General Musharraf knew or did not know about the strikes that took place, they issued this so-called red notice. I've spent 9 years of my life facing state-sponsored persecution. The regime doesn't like me to speak up about democracy. It doesn't like me to expose its policies of ambiguity. And so they keep threatening me with jail terms, but I've fought them because I have nothing to hide. And 9 years later, I'm proud to say that with the prayers of the people of Pakistan, there is not a single sentence against me for any corruption or any criminal action. I contested the elections of 2002, and I actually was elected to the assembly that came into being as a consequence of the elections of 2002. But to stop me from taking oath in that National Assembly, General Musharraf's regime had me sentenced for absconding or absenteeism. I challenged that in 2002. And all election matters are to be decided in 6 months. But we're in 2006 and it's not been decided. As far as the red notice is concerned, I learned about it from the press. My lawyer has written to the Ministry of Interior as well as to Interpol. My lawyer has asked them to confirm whether the news is accurate, and if so, on what grounds. And as far as I'm concerned, if any court wants me in Pakistan, I'm prepared to catch the next plane and go to Pakistan. So it's not an issue of my evading presence in a court, but no court in Pakistan, to my knowledge, has asked me to be present. And I believe that the Interpol has not been given the correct facts by the military regime in Pakistan. We've written to them to be heard. And we've also told the Pakistani regime that if you want her, let a court call her, and she'll come tomorrow.
Madam Prime Minister, Raghuveer Goyal, India Globe in Asia Today. My question is that, are you hoping that someday or one day you will be returning as the Prime Minister of a free and democratic Pakistan, and also as far as General Musharraf's regime or the military government in Pakistan is concerned, he's enjoying all the international help and he's enjoying his life as a general in Pakistan, including from Washington and also from London. And what do you think that as far as fighting against terrorism, as President said that he General Musharraf is ally of the United States because his help for the fighting against terrorism. How do you think that he's helping the West on war against terrorism? And finally, what do you think about the relations between Pakistan and India today compared with your administration?
I would agree with the assessment that General Musharraf and the military regime are exploiting the war on terror to continue their illegal tenure in office. I would disagree that there will be any undermining of terrorism. Yes, in the short term, General Musharraf has allowed overflights from Pakistan. Yes, in the short term, he has allowed Jacobabad Air Base to be used. But I believe any government in Pakistan would have done that. I believe at the end of the day, the military regime needs the war on terror in Pakistan to justify its continuation in office. And I believe that long term, it's a disaster to support the military regime, because internally, the country is facing huge social and political upheavals through disempowerment. Under pressure of the opposition, which had called for reduction in tension with India, General Musharraf has opened negotiations with India. The opposition has supported that despite its reservations on General Musharraf's military rule, but only time will show whether the military regime is actually sincere in reaching an accommodation, or whether we will see some accommodation, then another militant activity, then some accommodation, and then some militant activity.
I'm Ahmed Shakil Mia from Takbir and Urdu Times newspaper. Muhtarama, Pakistan has two popular leaders, Benazir Bhutto and Nawaz Sharif. Both of them are staying out of the country. Majority of the Pakistanis think that they are afraid to come to Pakistan. And how can you expect the revival of democracy in Pakistan while you are sitting outside? I think a third leader, Altaf Hussain, has done a better job than both of you and has kept his people and his partymen energized, while you are just hoping that maybe one day the God will give you an opportunity to go back. Thank you.
Well, I thank you for that question, and there are some people who feel that way, and I respect that, but I feel differently. I believe that freedom of movement and freedom of association and freedom of expression are very important to Pakistan's democratic struggle. And if I chose the hard and lonely road of exile, if I chose to bring up my small children far from their home, if I chose to sacrifice my husband's freedom for 8 long years and to face persecution and attempts at intimidation like the Red Alert, I did it for a cause, and that cause is the democratization of Pakistan. I recall the Prophet of Islam, peace be upon him, left the city of Mecca when the enemies of Islam had gathered there and went to Medina, but later returned in triumph. And certainly I hope that God will bless our efforts for the democratization of Pakistan with victory. But at the same time, I believe that we have to have an action plan. And it is under that action plan that I chose to have freedom of movement, freedom of association, and freedom of expression away from my country, to fight for my country. And as far as the democratization of Pakistan is concerned, I know that ultimately we will triumph. Every military dictator has gone, and this one too will go.
Muhtarama Benazir Bhutto, considering today's Palestinian election result...
Identify yourself, please.
Hero Zangana from Kurdish Service. Considering today's Palestinian election result in which Hamas gained the majority, why is it that in many Muslim society, when free and fair elections are held, extremist Islamic group gain power?
Well, that's a very relevant question. And I believe this is because dictatorships ignore the threat from the religious margins, and they concentrate on crushing the democratic opposition. So by the time elections come around, often the democratic opposition is too weak, and the militant parties are very strong. I mean, for example, in Pakistan, you've just seen our fellow Pakistanis say that the leaders of the Pakistan People's Party and the leaders of the Nawaz League have been forced into exile, and there are other leaders of ours, like the former Speaker of our National Assembly, like former Provincial Minister Bismillah Kakar, like Pir Mukarram, who are being held behind bars. They are arrested. But this is not so of the religious parties. None of their leaders are in exile. Their members were not broken to stop them from forming the government. So when we have dictatorships, we have a situation where the dictator needs to frighten the international community by propagating and allowing the religious parties to grow and to flourish while crushing democratic dissent. And that's why I believe it's in the interest of the international community not to let this happen. Otherwise, there will be a trap where the only alternative to dictatorship and tyranny will be either military tyranny or religious dictatorship. That's a situation we don't want, and that's why I agree when President Bush says that it's important to promote freedom to undermine terrorism in the world.
Thank you.
Kokab.
I'm Kokab Farshuri from Voice of America Urdu Television. I'd appreciate if you answer my question in Urdu. अब तक जितने भी मिलिट्री रूलर्स आए हैं और सिविलियन उनके खिलाफ मुनज़्ज़म तहरीकें चली हैं पाकिस्तान में, अयूब खान के खिलाफ तहरीक चली, आपके वालिद ने उसको हेड किया, ज़ियाउल हक़ के खिलाफ MRD की मूवमेंट में आपने बहुत भरपूर हिस्सा लिया, फिर नवाज़ शरीफ की हुकूमत के खिलाफ आपने और आपके खिलाफ नवाज़ शरीफ ने तहरीकें चलाई. क्या वजह है कि 6 साल से ज़्यादा अरसा गुजर गया है, अब तक सदर मुशर्रफ के खिलाफ कोई मुनज़्ज़म तहरीक पाकिस्तान में नहीं चल सकी?
तहरीक चलाने की कोशिश तो की गई है और इस सिलसिले में कई कुर्बानियाँ भी दिए गए हैं. जरदारी साहब को 8 साल के लिए जेल के अंदर रखा गया था. हमारे साबिक स्पीकर यूसुफ रज़ा गिलानी साहब इस वक्त भी गिरफ्तार हैं. दीगर हमारे दोस्त जैसे बिस्मिल्लाह काकर साहब, सूबाई वज़ीर पीर मुकर्रम, ये गिरफ्तार हैं. साबिक चीफ मिनिस्टर सिंध अब्दुल्ला शाह और बहुत से और जला वतन हैं. हम लोग जला वतन हैं क्योंकि पाकिस्तान के अंदर डिक्टेटरशिप ने ऑपोजिशन को क्रश करने की कोशिश की है. यहाँ तक क्रश करने की कोशिश की है कि एक जलसे की इजाज़त नहीं है. अगर रूलिंग पार्टी जो है PMLQ कोई जलसा मुनक्कद करती है तो उनको इजाज़त है. अगर MQM को करना है उनको इजाज़त है, MMA को इजाज़त है. मगर जब पाकिस्तान पीपल्स पार्टी या ARD कोशिश करती है तो सेक्शन 144 नाफिज किया जाता है और हमें इकट्ठा होने की भी इजाज़त नहीं दी जा सकती है. मगर उसके बावजूद हमने जमहूरियत के परचम को बुलंद रखा है और मैं पुरुम्मीद हूँ कि पाकिस्तान के अवाम हमारा साथ देंगे और हमारे मुल्क में दोबारा जमहूरियत बहाल होगी.
वेरी शॉर्ट फॉलोअप मोहतरमा, ये तमाम चीज़ें ज़ियाउल हक़ और अयूब खान के दौर में थी. ज़ियाउल हक़ के दौर में फांसियाँ भी हुई, जिलावतनियाँ भी हुई, लेकिन फिर भी बहुत मुनज़्ज़म तहरीक चली MRD की. क्या अब आप उस वक्त के मुकाबले में अपने आप को इतना मुनज़्ज़म नहीं पाती हैं?
मैं आपसे इख्तिलाफ रखती हूँ इस इशू पर, क्योंकि मुझे कई सहाफ़ी कहते थे ज़ियाउल हक़ के 11 साल दौर में कि आप लोग मुनज़्ज़म नहीं हैं, डिक्टेटर नहीं गया. मगर वो गलत है. डिक्टेटर गया, ये एक तसलसल है और ये डिक्टेटर भी जाएगा.
Nafisa.
Nafisa Hoodboy, Urdu Radio. My question to you is, the Federal Minister for Information, Sheikh Rashid, said this morning that you would be arrested if you try to come to Pakistan. What do you have to say to that?
Well, we live in a dictatorship. They can arrest anybody they want. It's up to them. You don't need a case against you. They just order it, and it's done. I see sitting here Mr. Shaheen Sibai. Perhaps he can tell you why he ended up here in Washington, D.C. He wrote a story. They didn't like it. They made a case against him, and he was forced to come here. So yes, they can do that. But is that going to affect? Is it going to bring something good for Musharraf? No. Is it going to bring something good for Pakistan? No. All it's going to do is delay the democratization and show that in Pakistan, the military dictator has no intention of transferring power, and that unless greater force and pressure is put on him, he's going to lead the country onto the road of ruin, the signs of which are already there in the northern areas being taken over, the tribal areas being taken over by the Taliban forces, and in the secessionist movement that has begun in Balochistan. And I might add that the gender issue is no better. We have had Mai Mukhtarin and Shazia Khalid and a whole range of ladies who have been dishonored in our country, and their culprits have not been proceeded against. I may add that the economic situation is grave. 57% of our people live on $2 and less a day. This is not right. And what we are fighting for in Pakistan is the social and economic emancipation of the people of Pakistan through democratic structures. We're looking for educational reform, madrasa reform. We're looking to build a Pakistan that is stable within and that is stable without.
Next question.
And as I said, my lawyer can be contacted anytime and told that this court needs you, and I'll be there. Why doesn't the Minister of Information do that? It's all doublespeak.
Madam Prime Minister, Assalamu alaikum. My name is Said Suleiman Shah from the Voice of America's Afghanistan Service. I will ask you about Afghanistan. Would you please comment on the present state of relations between Pakistan and Afghanistan? Because it seems that in spite of best efforts on both sides, still there is a lot of betterment. And another part of the same question is, Afghans mostly complain that during your government, some radical Islamists were also included in the government, like Maulana Fazlur Rahman, and the Taliban, as a matter of fact, came into power during your government. If you would please comment on this. Thank you so much.
As far as the relations between Pakistan and Afghanistan are concerned, they are governed by the principle of ambiguity, which Pakistan's military ruler has adopted as his foreign policy. So overtly, we have very good relations with Afghanistan, but covertly, a lot of the people who are actually laying the bombs in Afghanistan or killing the people do their activities and then run back across the area into the tribal area because they know that hot pursuit is not permitted. And if you look at the New York Times of January 22nd, you'll see that the electronic surveillance finds that the pro-Taliban forces continue to chatter on the Pakistan side of the border where they do not feel any threat. But once they cross over into the Afghanistan side of the border, the chatter dies down totally. I believe that the chatter was described as the lights of the Christmas tree coming on when it's on the side of Pakistan and going out when it's on the side of Afghanistan. So there is this policy of ambiguity, and I believe that certain hardline elements that destabilized my government believe that that they would like to wait for a time when the US and the international community turns its attention away from Afghanistan, and then perhaps they feel that they would like to bring back the Taliban in a new shape or a new form. So the danger remains, and I believe the danger will continue unless we start building political structures which are pluralistic, which are democratic, which empower people, which address the reasons for which people live, their health, their education, roads, sanitation. Those are being neglected today. As far as Pakistan People's Party government is concerned, considered, yes, at the time when the Taliban first came into being, there were many, not just us, but people here in Washington and also in Europe, who thought that maybe the Taliban would make a factor for peace because they took over without a fight. But at the same time, we were working with them for a broad-based government in which all the Afghan parties and leaders would be involved. However, with the overthrow of my government, that process stopped. The UN process for a broad-based government stopped, and after the overthrow of my government, Taliban changed. It invited in Al-Qaeda, and it allowed them to set up recruiting camps. It allowed them to train people, and then it allowed them to declare war against America. I was then in Pakistan when war was declared against America, and I gave a speech in the National Parliament of Pakistan in which I said that the Taliban, by harboring Al-Qaeda, have shown that they pose a danger to Pakistan. And I said Pakistan should either break relations with the Taliban or tell them that it will not tolerate having relations with a country that is working in violation of international rules and precedents. So we very much I and the Pakistan People's Party would very much like to see a democratic, secular, moderate government in Afghanistan succeed. We share the pain of the Afghan people who lived so many years under Soviet occupation and then through civil war. But I believe that long-term peace in the region can only come about when we begin the democratization of Pakistan, not democratization of Pakistan so that one government can change another, but democratization of Pakistan so that one system can replace another system, a system that is legal, a system that provides justice and is responsive to the needs of the people. I see people in Pakistan committing suicide because they cannot afford to live, and it hurts me deeply. We've had so much aid come from the international community, and for me it's a matter of shame that we have not been able to give part of that aid and assistance to the poor people within my country.
Thank you so much.
Okay. 2 more questions.
Amy Hybels with Associated Press Television News. Interpol says that they are seeking arrest charges for both you and your husband on corruption charges. Just for clarification, are you saying that the corruption charges against both you and your husband are completely groundless?
Yes, I'm saying that, and I'm saying we faced them for 9 years, and there's not a single conviction for corruption against us. There's a single conviction for absenting myself from a court in Pakistan, which I have challenged and said I did not absent myself. I was present through my defense attorney, and the government of General Musharraf has not let that petition be heard, because if it is proved that I was not absented from the court, then it means I'm a member of the National Assembly of Pakistan, and banning me from the National Assembly was wrong. So yes, my husband and I have faced these scurrilous, baseless, malicious, and politically motivated charges for the last 9 years. And by the grace of God, there's not a single conviction against either my husband or myself for fraud or for corruption. As I mentioned, there's a single sentence against me, not my husband, for absenteeism. And I have challenged that. I challenged it in 2002, but this is 2006, and that has still not been heard. I'm on bail in all the cases against me. I left with the permission of the courts. And my lawyer has written to the Ministry of Interior and said, which court has asked for her to be present? You tell us which court has allowed her to be present, and she will present herself. So I would request your support in putting this question to the government of Pakistan, that which court requires her present and on which day, because Madam Bhutto will be back there for that hearing.
And the final question.
Hi, Jared Kowalski from the Dallas Morning News. Would you care to comment on behalf of the PPP on American directive military strikes on the Pakistani border towards Al-Qaeda for targeting specific assassinations, as well as civilians that are harmed in the attitude you have?
Well, the Pakistan People's Party is deeply concerned that innocent civilians have lost their lives in these airstrikes. At the same time, the Pakistan People's Party appreciates that some militants and pro-Taliban, pro-Al-Qaeda elements are using our territory to mount attacks in neighboring Afghanistan, and that's not right. The Pakistan People's Party is committed to clearing up the tribal areas from militants and from militancy, and believes that General Musharraf's regime has not done enough to restore the writ of state in the tribal areas, and that unless the writ of state is restored in the tribal areas, a vacuum will be caused, and if a vacuum is created, then obviously outside forces will intervene. Therefore, to prevent the intervention of outside forces, it is essential that Pakistan clear up the tribal areas of militants and militancy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Brian. Thank you, Voice of America. And thank you, all of you, for being here.
We would very much like to thank Benazir Sahab and Asif Saab for taking time out of an important, busy schedule, and to all of you for taking time out of your schedules to come for this event. Thank you for coming.